I don't think we got through very much. We got here, right? All right, hey, sit down. Listen, that means I got through less than half, so we're going to have to speed up a little bit. All right? We're going to look at the economy first. Okay, so we're going to look, and hopefully some of this is slightly reviewed because we covered it in the last PowerPoint. But again, I have decided in life, even though it violates my very principles, I'm going to start being redundant for the sake of redundancies. Because that's going to be what helps y'all learn better. Right? Okay, we're all good. Alright, so, first, right, economic, I hate, this actually makes me feel disgusting. It really does. I hate talking about this in history, right? But black people, y'all understand slaves are a commodity, yes? Hold on. Can we define that word, commodity? No, not a necessity. A good, yes, that's, Tyler, there you go. Right? So, a good, that's really what we're looking at, right? And so I hate to say that, like, people are goods. But then again, I'm going to be honest with you, like, as soon as there's, like a robot housekeeper, like, I'm buying one. So, I would want somebody else to do my work for me, too. Right? But slaves are a commodity. The reality is slaves are wealth. Right? And when you look, and we'll talk about it a little bit today, but we'll really get into it in what we really call like the antebellum period, right? Which is like American South, right? So like right up until the Civil War, Virginians are foolish, right? And we're going to cover all this today because they're going to mess up with the crops and like they don't do crop rotation and they deplete the soil trying to grow tobacco because they're trying to get rich quick. And I need you to realize, like I need you to understand, because this is something we'll talk about again over and over and over again as well, right? It is everybody has a get rich quick scheme or ideology. Like nobody wants, this is just human nature, right? Nobody wants to work that hard, right? Everybody wants to just get rich quick. Okay? Virginians are doing this in the 17th century. They're growing tobacco in their fields for 3 or 4 years until the nitrogen has been depleted in the soil, and then they move on and they go get a farm somewhere else. Right? They're going to cause problems. Ultimately, what ends up happening in Virginia, right, and this is the basic understanding of like Virginian economics, our elite planters in Virginia, our elites, our rich people in Virginia are not rich. Not really. Because they've only got 2 things that have any actual value. Land, because the headright system, right? They own thousands of acres. Y'all understand land is valuable. Okay? Free advice from me to you. Okay? This is just free like life advice. Buy you some land as soon as you can. Okay?
Doesn't matter where.
Nope. It really doesn't. Right? I would buy land somewhere where you want it to be. Right? But the value of land will only go up. It will not. It will not go down. Okay? Because the land as a commodity, right? Again, we talk about this, Native Americans didn't have concepts of land ownership, right? But land as a commodity is limited, right? Like y'all understand I can build more computers, I can build more cars. I can actually build more houses if I just keep making them closer and closer together, right? Like all of these pre-planned communities now where you can high-five your neighbor outside your kitchen window. I don't want to live in a house like that, right? But they're not making any more land, right? So they have land. The only other commodity that these people have that is worth anything are the slaves, right? And so we'll talk about it, but eventually, like Virginia figures out they don't have anything else of value except slaves, and then they're going to get into some real shady business in the mid-19th century. So the value of slaves in the South is in terms of the bell curve, right? Y'all know what a bell curve is, yes? Y'all know what a bell looks like? Right? Like that's a bell. Okay? So if you look at the value, so if we were to like, oh God, now I'm teaching economics and I hate economics. Right? We're going to graph this so that you can understand it. Right? So if we're talking about the market for slaves, right? You have a little graph. You have a bell curve that looks like that. Okay? This is the price. This is the age of the slave. Really, really young slaves are actually not that expensive. Right? But you understand, like if you bought a 4-year-old right now, how much work are you getting out of that 4-year-old? Nothing. Right? What do you have to do? Clothe them, feed them, like he's still costing you money, right? Because it's not like buying a T-shirt that's 3 sizes too big, and you're like, well, eventually I'll grow into it, right? Like this is a human being. You have to feed them and provide basic necessities for them so that they survive, right? And understand, it's probably overemphasized in this day and age because slavery is horrible. Like nobody in their right mind thinks like, oh, slavery is okay, right? Like it's atrocious. It's horrible, right? But and there were, like, make no mistake, there were people that treated slaves as sort of inhuman, right? Like as honestly probably worse than y'all would treat like a actual beast of burden, right? Like we remember that term when we talked about the Native Americans. They used dogs to like drag sleds and transport stuff, and then they got horses from the Europeans, and horses can obviously like drag more, they carry more, they're bigger animals, they got a bigger load, right? Like, I mean, if you've got an ox that's plowing your field, like, you're not out there every night hugging on him and loving on that ox and being like, you're such a good boy, right? Like, maybe you do that with your dog, because your dog's like family, like, I get that, right? And there were definitely, like, overseers that treated slaves worse than, like, just a regular person would treat a donkey or an ox that was helping to plow their fields. But that's probably overemphasized now when we teach history, because the reality is slaves are a commodity, right? If I beat a slave half to death and then they can't work for 3 weeks, what does that do to my business? It hurts my business. Right? Like I bought that person to work. Excuse me. I bought that person to work in my field. Right? If I beat them within an inch of their life and now they're laid up in the slave quarters for a month healing, right? Because I damn near killed them. Well, that's a month I go without labor. Right? Which means either other people have to pick up the slack or my production decreases. That doesn't make a lot of economic sense. Right? So that's probably more common that they were treated the same way you would treat a horse, right? Like, again, not great, not like a person, but also we're not like beating them within an inch of their life every other day, okay? So this is the bell curve, right? There's also some differences in terms of things like gender, for instance, right? You think male or female slaves were more expensive? Men were more expensive than women, right? Do you think it mattered if you were like fresh off the boat from Africa or if you were like 2nd or 3rd generation slave having been in America? Oh, it matters. Who would you rather have? Right? If you were an overseer, if you were running a plantation, would you rather have a slave who has a mom and dad like 2 plantations over, or would you rather have a slave that just came here from Africa?
Just came here from Africa.
Why, Georgia?
Because they don't own the land.
They don't own the land. They don't have any like. There's no familial structure. I mean, think about this for a second. If you was 6 years old, 8 years old, let's say you were 8 years old, right? So like you're just old enough. Like if you took my little 2nd grader right there, right, and you took her and you put her in a house that was a mile away from my house. You think that little girl gonna run home? Yeah. Of course you would, right? So the value of fresh off the boat would be higher than the value of those. So really it's like 4 different bell curves, right? Like men from Africa, men in America, women from Africa, women in America. Got it? Okay. In terms of like real worth, right? Now when I say real worth, do we know what that means? Not today's money, right? Because today's money is talking about real value, right? Or inflationary value. Real worth, right, is basically saying what are you making off of that product or that commodity, right? And you're talking about like a human being that's worth $500,000. Okay? So it's big business. It's real big business. Alright? Tobacco, we already talked about this. We know that this is what makes Virginia profitable. Relatively early on, right? Like we got Jamestown in 1607, and then Rolfe first starts growing tobacco, I believe in 1612. Right? It doesn't take them real long. Now, just y'all understand, just like people, right? Have we all been through a biology class?
Yeah.
We know what genes are?
Yeah.
Yes? Y'all understand plants have genes, yes? Okay? So like different tomatoes grow differently, right? Different tomatoes taste differently, right? Same concept with tobacco, right? And interestingly enough, we're actually smart enough, even in the 17th century, to sort of try to like cross-pollinate and figure out, you know, which strains of tobacco are most suited to the soil, right? Like that produce the best quality tobacco in order to sell into future markets, right? What we don't do is what's called crop rotation. Y'all know what that is?
Isn't that like when you have multiple fields and like you use one and then the next season you use a different one?
Excellent. So the way the way this works, like if you're actually ever a farmer, right? Like if you at some point in time in your life, if you decide you want to be a farmer, right? We've got our little plantation, and then we've just got fields. I'm gonna draw this hastily up here, right? We got fields. The way crop rotation works is I'm gonna grow corn here, right? I'm gonna grow tobacco here. Okay, I'm gonna grow I don't know what else we were growing back then. I'm gonna grow beans here. Okay? And then I'm gonna leave this one open. Okay? And I'm gonna let the soil replenish itself. And then the next time we're just gonna rotate clockwise. Right? And it's going to go like this. And now this is open. This is corn, tobacco, beans. Right? It gives the soil a chance to replenish. Anybody know how like when humanity figured this out? Oh, we don't do this. This is the problem. The Virginians don't do this. They just grow tobacco everywhere. Right? And so within like 2 or 3 cycles, like 2 or 3 crop rotations, right, the soil is depleted. And then you have to move on and you've got to go plant somewhere else. We figured this out in like Samaria. Y'all know where Samaria is? Mesopotamia, like the Tigris and Euphrates River, like the foundation of like civilization. Like the first time somebody went, oh look, we can domesticate wheat. Let's grow some wheat, make some beer, and then we're not going anywhere again.
Well, the Virginians, did they do crop rotation?
No, but people knew what it was.
It says it on the board. It's 40.
Meaning it was practiced elsewhere. The concept existed, but we didn't do it. Right? Which again should show you the mentality of, well, there's no forward thinking in that. Y'all understand that? Right? There's absolutely no forward thinking in going, hey, I want to be profitable for decades. No, I'm just looking about being profitable right now. Okay? Which is one of the things that's really going to harm Virginia. Okay? Because they have no forethought it's, again, because it was a company, they went there. What did they actually go there for the first time? Gold. Right? They went for gold. It was this get rich quick mentality that kills them. Ultimately, like the tobacco that really ends up being profitable, I think came from like Guatemala. Right? I forget exactly where it came from. But eventually, they find tobacco that's actually profitable. The English become the biggest tobacco producers and suppliers in the globe. Right? They actually overtake the Spanish in that. And then tobacco actually becomes a commodity in Virginia. Right? And so now what I mean when I say commodity is essentially a good that is traded as currency. You understand that? Right? So if Maddie owes me $20, right? And in lieu of the $20, I'm willing to take a pound of tobacco off of her farm, are we even? Sure. Right? At that point, she has paid off her debt, but not with money. She's paid it off with a commodity. Right? Now, that gets real interesting, right? Because y'all are probably about the age where you're starting to think about maybe wanting to own your own car, right? Okay? So if you go buy a used car, what kind of quality you get in there? Hopefully not. Hopefully you wouldn't buy a garbage car. But here's the thing. How do you know that what you're getting is, like, how do you understand the quality of what you're getting? One test drive might not necessarily be good enough. I mean, because think about this. Let's just say I had no morals, right? That's not that hard to imagine, okay? And so instead of Maddie owing me $20, I owe Maddie $20. Right, so I'm going to give her a pound of tobacco. Okay? Now, Maddie's a little suspect because she knows I don't have no morals. So she's like, I don't think your tobacco is the good tobacco. I think you grew the cheap stuff. Right? And so I give her a little bit to test. Right? She smokes it. Well, that was good. Right? So she takes the $20 worth of tobacco. Except I gave her a tiny little bit of the good stuff to try, and then I gave her $20 for the crap tobacco. Right? It really only cost me like $3. Right? If she tried to trade it to somebody else, it's worth $3. But now we're paid off. How do you stop that from happening? Governmental oversight. Right? You actually have governmental oversight that is occurring this early in colonialism. Right? You have people who are empowered by the government to look at tobacco crops to ensure that what's being sent back to England is not inferior quality. Because the way it was really working, y'all understand like shipping and costs like that, like it's not like today where you can just box something up in your little Amazon box, right, and then it just goes just to Tyler's house and then that one goes there. Like, no. Like we're shipping tobacco all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to England, so what do? Right? Everybody brings their tobacco to the same location. It gets loaded on one ship and it gets sent to England. Right? But here's the thing. Again, if I'm that planter with low morals, right, and I'm producing the crap tobacco, and the rest of you all are all making the good stuff, right? When it gets to England and it gets sold, what happens to the value of your stuff? So the problem is the value decreases, right? Because the purchasers in England, those that got my stuff, they don't know where it actually came from. They're just buying this Virginia tobacco. Okay? But because word spreads now that some of that Virginia tobacco is no good, that harms you. It don't harm me. Right? Because I knew I was peddling crap in the first place. So all of you then would have a vested interest in ensuring that my terrible tobacco doesn't end up in the same shipment as yours, right? Because your product has a reputation to uphold. Alright? Okay, commercial farming. So this is, in fact, that's actually what the tobacco looked like, right? Like they would basically put it all together in sheds. I already explained to you what a commodity exchange is. Okay, consignment. So here's the other thing that happens. Okay, again, hopefully you would understand. It would be wildly inefficient for a Virginia planter to take his tobacco, go to England and sell it himself. Yes? Right? That's not very efficient, especially considering it takes a long time to get to Virginia. Sorry, to get to England. And then a long time to get back, for that matter. Right? Like at that point, he might have already missed a planting season. So what does he have to do? He's got to get a broker. He's got to hire somebody for him. That's what consignment is. Right? Consignment is basically getting a broker or a middleman, somebody to go and sell the product for you. Right? But what does that do to your profits? It's going to decrease your profits, right? Because you got to pay the middleman, got to get paid, right? Right? The middleman's got to get paid. So now profits are going to decrease as a result of the middleman needing to get paid. Okay? So that's going to hurt Virginia, right? Virginia becomes less profitable because of that. All right? Virginia's also, they're going to end up in like massive debt because Virginia's got expensive tastes. The small farms versus the plantations, ultimately what ends up happening, and again, that little scenario that I gave you where I'm sort of peddling the lower quality tobacco, right? Like I would be a small farmer, okay? I don't have the labor for the good stuff. I don't have like the slaves that I could purchase in order to do all that labor for me, right? There's sort of an old saying that says it takes money to make money, and it's probably a true statement. Right? So as a small farmer, I don't really have any money in the first place. It's hard for me to buy the good seeds to plant the good tobacco, right? So the plantations, once we have these inspectors overseeing them, they're trying to push the little guy out even further, thus making it even harder for the little guy to make money, right? Because now, frequently, the little guy is actually having to sell it to the plantation, then the plantation is giving it to the consignor, right, and then the consignor is going and selling it in England, right? But that means the plantation gets a cut of my profit as a small farmer, right? And the consignor also gets a cut of my profit as a small farmer. And because it was a small farm, I don't have that much overhead in the first place. I don't have that much product, right? Because understand, if I'm making, let's just say for the sake of argument, I make $1 a pound on tobacco, right? And I was only able to grow 100 pounds of tobacco, well then I made $100 for the entire year, right? If Maddie has a plantation, she's doing the exact same thing. She got the exact same profit margin, right? She making $1 a pound, but because she got a plantation, she grew 100,000 pounds. She made $100,000, right? Even though her profit margin isn't higher than mine, right? She makes significantly more. Then she can take that $100,000, go out, buy more slaves, go out, buy more land, and increase what she's doing. Whereas I only got $100. What's that $100 going to? Like seeds for the next one. Maybe I can go and afford like a donkey, right? So Virginia really has land-based wealth, right? Their wealth, as I told you a second ago, is predominantly based upon land and slaves. They don't have a lot of cash flow. Okay? They're trading commodities. Those commodities are being sold for them, right? And then frequently, they're not even getting like the money back, right? Like when that consignor comes back, they're not bringing the colonial planter. They're not bringing the colonial planter cash. Instead, they're bringing the colonial planter like European goods, silverware, furniture for their home, things like that. Right? Do y'all understand the difference between raw materials and finished products? What's more expensive? Finished products, right? Because you've got all these middlemen that you got to pay. All of these artisans, these people that are actually making the products, you got to pay all of them, right? So what happens then, specifically in the South is trading raw goods for finished products. That's a bad way to live economically, right? You actually have a whole bunch of Southern planters that are massively dead. You go back and read, like our founding fathers, like you go back and read about like George Washington or James Monroe or Thomas Jefferson. Like these guys looked on the outside like they were rich because that is an actual plantation house from like 1630. Like they built that in 1630. Well, I'm sure they've like repaired it and updated it and whatnot, right? But I mean, plantation homes in the 17th century were large. I told you the other day, right? Like that was also like a social location, right? Because they didn't have towns and city squares, so people are coming to your individual home. You've got to be able to entertain them, which means you have to have some sort of parlor, right? Some sort of like sitting room, some sort of like communal space outside. Like you can't just have a kitchen and a bedroom, right? Because that's essentially what you had on the frontier, right? Like you had 2-room houses. A room where you ate and lived, and then a room where you slept. Okay? But they're doing all of this. You don't realize that, like, now you've got to buy a lot of furniture. You've got to buy, like, chandeliers. And all of this now becomes optics, right? Because if you walk into somebody's plantation home and it looks unfurnished, what are you thinking?
Poor.
Oh, they're poor. They can't really afford this house. Right? So there's a social status that goes into all of this. Alright? Massachusetts economy, right? We're going with whaling and fishing first. We already know. We already talked about this, right? But we know that cod fishing is occurring up there, yes? Right? There's a lot of fish. And there's also whales. And whales are significant in the 17th and then into the 18th century, right? Because prior to the 20th century, right, which means 1900, right? Prior to 1900, we don't have oil. Right? Like, oil is not really a thing. What you think of as oil doesn't exist. You understand oil is used as like a heating element, yes? Y'all understand it in the 18th century they had like oil lamps. Okay? But it wasn't the oil that turns into gasoline. What kind of oil was it? Whale blubber. Right? And this is what amazes me. Y'all understand whales are massive animals, right? Like, massive animals. Dude, like that picture is actually not that unrealistic. Do y'all see the tiny little boat next to the whale's tail? That's the kind of thing people would row out into the Atlantic Ocean with and then start trying to like spear the whale, like harpoon it, and then drag it back to shore. Like, I'm sorry. That's like trying to attack an elephant on a bicycle. But that's what they did, right? And part of it was because you needed the maneuverability, right? Like you needed y'all understand that the larger the ship, the harder it is to move it, yes? And so, obviously because it's a whale and it's very fluid, it can move very easily. You need a ship that can sort of do the same thing. But that's a difficult process. Interestingly enough, as far as the whaling goes, right, a lot of the actual labor for it is Native Americans. Right? But you're going to have some significant, you're having a significant whaling industry in the New England area. Again, because that blubber, that oil is sort of essential. That's how you're going to have lamps and light after dark and things like that. Okay? The fishing in New England, though, does lead to another industry that's going to matter in the New England area, and that is shipping. Right? So shipping and shipbuilding. There is an abundance of timber in the New England area. Timber is just lumber, trees, right? You cut down trees, you use the cut down trees to build ships. And by the time we get to the 17th century, do y'all understand, like, Europe is overpopulated? Yes? Hey, if you don't understand that, like that's going to be a routine thing that we talk about Europeans coming to the United States, right, coming to the New World. There's not a lot of opportunity there. There certainly is not a lot of land. If there's not a lot of land, that means that the land has all been cultivated, meaning it's been turned into farms and fields, right? What do you not have on farms and fields and homes? Trees. Right? So if you're building your houses, if you're building log cabins, if you're building ships out of wood, where are you getting that wood from?
Trees.
Right? It comes from trees. The New World, specifically the New England area, becomes a massive opportunity for that. Right? Like, a fun fact, eventually Americans figure out, like, we go further into the wilderness, cut down a whole bunch of trees, and just throw the trees into rivers. Right? Because then what do the rivers do? They move it down to like York or Philadelphia, right? Because wood floats, right? So they move it down, it goes downriver to like the port cities where there's factories and things like that. So you're like, shipping costs for massive amounts of lumber is pretty much nothing, right? Because obviously before you have like massive tractor trailers and things like that, like dragging a single tree trunk like a quarter mile, like Stephen Hopkins had to do in Massachusetts, right? Like that can take you hours. Okay? So the New England area is going to become a very commercialized area, right? What that means is once they start building ships, once they start having commercial shipping coming through there, right, now at this point they're going to have their own consigners, they're going to have people that are engaged in international commerce, right? This is where the triangular trade with the United States really ramps up, okay? And so some of these New Englanders, like they're not importing the slaves, right, but they're the ones that are building English ships, right, or British ships, because they would fly under the British flag at this point, right? They're the ones building the ships that are then engaged in that triangular trade of sort of England to Africa to various places in the New World where you've got, some British goods and guns going to Africa, slaves coming to the New World, and then raw materials going back to England to be turned into finished products. And eventually, England's going to end up into a concept called mercantilism, right? Mercantilism is an economic philosophy in which you have a mother country, that is England, right, who is dictating to satellite nations or colonies the behaviors that they can engage in trading-wise. It essentially means that when, like, the East India Tea Company, right, like when East India is going to ship tea to America, right, and there's trade back and forth, that's a British colony and a British colony, England gets a cut, right? And they're also making sure that you're not trading with, like, the Dutch tea company, right? They're going to dictate which companies you can and cannot trade with, right? There is agriculture up in the New England area. There's a limited grow season. It's more sustenance farming than it is like commercial agriculture, right? Do we know what sustenance farming means?
You only farm what you need.
Yeah, you're only farming for yourself. You're not selling it, right? So commercial farming is selling farming goods for some sort of profit, right? And then sustenance farming is just growing whatever it is that you're going to do. We do find ranching works up there, right? Because you can ranch on sort of hillier, rockier soil. It's actually hard to grow like crops on really uneven land. Y'all realize you've never really seen like farms on the side of mountains unless it's like a plateau. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be like completely flat. It don't, right? But obviously, if it's wildly sloped, as you're turning the land over, right? Like as you dig up the land in order to plant seeds, then if it rains, everything washes down, right? So it's really hard to do that. And we're going to cover South Carolina because South Carolina is sort of unique. Okay, yes, it is a southern colony. One, just understand this. First of all, people that settle in South Carolina don't come from England. Right? Like even your white people don't come from England. They come from the Caribbean. Okay? And they're actually going to take some of the ideas, some of the things that they learned in the Caribbean, and they're going to bring them to South Carolina. Again, South Carolina is sort of weird, and it's weird agriculturally, right? South Carolina is hot enough, it's warm enough, it's humid enough that you can grow like sugarcane. Most of the sugarcane was coming out of the Caribbean islands, right? Sugarcane is what you use to make rum. That's why like the Caribbean islands are where all the rum is produced. Yes? Okay? But so they're coming out of like Barbados, coming from the Caribbean islands up to South Carolina. So they bring a lot of slaves with them in South Carolina. South Carolina has the highest per capita slave population of anywhere in the United States. Do we know what per capita means? Yeah, like percentage-wise, right? Not necessarily raw numbers, Okay, but percentage-wise, when we compare blacks to whites or slaves to free, that's actually probably a better way of saying it, slave to free, right? The highest percentage of slavery exists in South Carolina, right? They can grow rice, they can grow indigo, which is actually what you see on the screen. That's basically a dye used to like dye blue jeans. Like that's how you get the blue in blue jeans, right? Now y'all understand blue jeans are actually cotton, yes? Like denim is anyway. And they can grow cotton, they can grow sugar cane, but they're not growing tobacco. Tobacco is really going to stop in North Carolina, right? So South Carolina, their economy is a little bit different, right? Actually, rice is another really fascinating one because rice really only grows in like 2 places in the world, right? Right? Most rice actually comes from Southeast Asia, right? Because of the like sort of the way rice is cultivated, right? Which I don't really care that you understand how it's cultivated. The Middle Colonies economy, it's sort of the best of both worlds, right? You might not necessarily think it, but like Pennsylvania, for instance, right? It's fairly far north, but Pennsylvania is actually sort of fairly flat. You sort of have rolling hills in Pennsylvania until you get way out here in western Pennsylvania. You can have farms. They don't have real long grow seasons up there, but the soil's pretty rich, right? We actually have like Scandinavian people that will eventually come and settle the Great Lakes region up here in like Minnesota and Wisconsin. Same concept. Short grow season, because it's obviously a lot further north and it's colder, but the soil is actually fairly rich, right? Meaning it's capable of growing it, right? They do engage in some lumber, right, and some shipping. Philadelphia is a significant port. Jersey is really a middle colony. New York is actually a middle colony, and New York City is a massive port, right? What the middle colonies do create that doesn't necessarily happen, especially in the South, really doesn't happen in the South, is you have sort of an early middle class that occurs, right? And I need you to understand, like, middle classes can only happen where there's commerce. Okay? Meaning you have to have like buying and selling going on, right? Throughout the entire community. Okay? When you go back and you look at Virginia, for instance, you have the massive plantations. They're selling their stuff elsewhere. Small farmers, frontier farmers that are more sustenance farmers, right? That's not commerce, right? That's commercial activity, but it's not commerce. Understand the difference, okay? But in like Philadelphia, you would have cobblers, blacksmiths, all sorts of different industries that would begin to be created, right? Like early law offices, medical offices, right? Some of our early sort of skilled labor is really occurring in this area, okay? Maryland's weird. It's kind of a southern colony, right? But like Baltimore is going to have a fair amount of artisans. Baltimore becomes a significant actual real city, right? You'll have printing presses and major newspapers that are coming out of the urban areas within the middle colonies as a result of all of this, right? Then we've got our frontier economy. And so if we go back to that slide where it showed where people were coming, the frontier economy is really the furthest groups west, right? They're away from the coast. The coast is where our economic, commercial activity is happening. Frontiersmen are wildly independent. They have sustenance farming, right? They're growing stuff in a rockier sort of area, right? A more wooded area. Corn actually grows really well out there. Okay? So your sustenance farmers, your frontiers farmers, their economy is based more upon corn than anything else. The excess corn that they grow, they turn into whiskey, right? Okay? And then that whiskey is used in bartering. We know what bartering is? Trading, right? So if we're all the way on the frontier, there's some stuff that I'm not going to be able to have, right? I might not be able to grow my own cotton, for instance, in West Virginia. So if I'm out there in Western Virginia and I'm not growing cotton, but I need to make new clothes, okay, I can trade some whiskey for some textiles, right? their biggest concern along the frontier is defense. That's all they really care about, because they are the ones that are the buffer between Native Americans. They're the ones that are at risk. Their sort of safety and well-being. And I put it in an economy, right? But really, it's their safety. Okay? They'll be out working their own fields, and there would be raids. They raided Native Americans too, though. It went both ways, right? But that's a significant issue. All right, that's going to lead us to Bacon's rebellion, because Bacon is a frontiersman, right? He's a frontiersman in Virginia who is unhappy with sort of what he sees as a lack of concern or a lack of caring for the frontier farmer, right? He sees himself, and mind you, dude honestly acts like he's like a frontiersman and like a average Joe. He really isn't. He's actually like a cousin to Governor Berkeley, who is the dude that's running all of Virginia at this point. But Bacon's rebellion is really occurring as a result of a handful of things, right? We had mercantilism enacted by the British, which decreases the economy of the colony. You have some droughts that were occurring at the time. There's more competition for tobacco. There's political instability in England occurring at this time, because in the late 17th century, England had like Cromwell's Revolution and the Glorious Revolution, right? There's some issues with the English monarchy, the English crown, and who's actually running England. That all negatively affects what's going on here in the colonies, right? So there's a whole bunch of factors, economic factors that go into this, but Bacon basically gets upset because he feels like the House of Burgesses, which is the colonial Virginia government, is not responsive to the needs of the people on the frontier. And so he's going to lead an actual, real rebellion. It gets pretty dicey. This is a recreation of a standoff between Berkeley and Bacon, in which apparently, rumor is, Berkeley looked at Bacon and was like, well, go ahead and shoot me right now, right? And Bacon doesn't do that. Berkeley called his bluff. Bacon eventually dies of like disease. He dies from like, he catches something. And once he's dead, the other leaders of the rebellion are rounded up and executed. And there's not a whole lot that comes out of this, except it does create at least some level of a mentality, an ideology amongst the colonials about things like representation and government responsiveness to the desires and the will of people. Right? And the House of Burgesses at this point was dominated by your like elite planter class, the plantation owners on the east coast of Virginia. Okay? Those people have significantly different concerns and cares than what the frontier's Virginiamen did. Yes? You understand that? Obviously, if you own 5,000 acres, right, in Richmond, you care about different things. You care about tobacco prices and things like that, and shipping, right, and probably like slave codes, way more than you care about Native American skirmishes that are occurring in like present-day West Virginia up in the Appalachian Mountains. And so since the House of Burgesses was dominated by those elite East Coast planters, they're not responsive to the needs of the frontiersmen, and that's going to become an ideology, a mentality that continues to show up. Right? So moving back up north, in the late 17th century, we had the Salem witch trials. A couple of things that I want you to understand. Number one, this is not the first time we've had some witch trials, right? This is relatively common. It dates all the way back to the 14th century, right? So we've done this for more than like 3 centuries. A whole bunch of people in England were burned at the stake or hung or whatever. Ultimately, in the Massachusetts area, you end up with more than 200 people that were accused of witchcraft. 19 or 20. I gotta go back and look again, because I've got both in my notes 19 and 20 people were hung as a result of witchcraft. I'm not 100% certain which is correct. I would not test you on that specific number, right? But I want you to understand that it's more than like one. Like, we killed a good handful of people, right, over some general ridiculousness. And we're talking about like absolute mass hysteria, because the evidence that was used in people's trials right, is like Sophia would take the stand and be like, Maddie's a witch because I had a dream, right? And I mean, listen, gentlemen, because it's going to happen to you. I promise you, like, eventually you're going to get married. You're going to wake up one morning, your wife's going to get mad at you, and you'll be like, what did I do? And she's going to look at you like, you know what you did last night in my dream. And then your just whole day is ruined. It will happen to you. I promise. It happens to me regularly. Okay? But, yeah, Caleb, I'm not joking. Like, women are crazy sometimes. Sorry. Okay? But, like, you understand that that's ridiculous, right? Like, I had a dream is not evidence that you're practicing witchcraft. Do you understand that? But we allow that in the trial. That is absurd. Okay? And the only reason that it stops is this dude, William Phipps, right? Phipps ends up becoming sort of like the lead magistrate, right? Like the head judge over all of this. And then Phipps' wife is accused. And he's like, wait, hold up. No more of this dream evidence stuff. We're not doing that. Right? And at that point, once it becomes personal, because it's always easier for us to be like, well, she a witch over there. Right? But once it comes into your house, like once somebody you know and love is accused, it takes on a different mentality and a different understanding. Okay? And so at that point, Phipps is going to pardon a whole bunch of people, like let them back out of jail, right? We're going to forgive and forget. But we go all the way until like 2004 before like we officially overturn the last conviction for witchcraft.
People were still in jail for witchcraft in 2004.
No, we do it posthumously. So they're dead, they were executed, right? And then their ancestors after the fact are like, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granny was not a witch. I would like it taken off the record that she was a witch, and I would like you to admit that you executed her wrongly. Right? And then somebody's like, okay, and now your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granny is not a witch anymore, and was hung incorrectly. Shortly after it happens, and like families actually get some recourse from this, and some like they get a little they get compensation from the government sometimes in terms of like monetary compensation. I got 1 minute. The Enlightenment. It's just the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening. This is the last two slides. So real quick, the Enlightenment is the age of reason, scientific thinking, right? Newton, apple drops on his head. We got gravity, right? Like we already know that the Earth rotates around the sun, not the other way around. Okay, Locke's going to come up with natural light rights. Like you have a right to life, liberty, and property. Like just naturally, like it just exists. Nobody got to give it to you. Okay. When that happens, you got the Great Awakening that comes in response, right? Because all of a sudden, when people find science, right, then they lose Jesus, and now they need Jesus again, right? And so with the Great Awakening, you literally have people that are going around the countryside, like, preaching Jesus. All right, hallelujah. Have a good day.